So, okay, let's go to Russell Bernard. Okay, now we can begin, now that Biju's here, because I'm going to start by talking about the reading by Bernard that talks about semi-structured and unstructured interviewing. And I was hoping that you could give a few comments on your experience, doing these different kinds of interviews. So this reading I've just given you one chapter from Russell Bernard's Research Methods in Anthropology, the third edition. There are more recent editions. You may notice some of the information is a little bit dated, like, discussing, getting a tape recorder, for your interviews. And that's just the edition that my library had in a hard copy that I could just take and scan. But there have been subsequent editions to this book. I mean, some of it doesn't change, like the definition of structured, unstructured, and structured interviewing. Now, when anthropologists decide on their research methods, of course, they use these ethnographic methods that we talk about, but very often anthropologists are somewhat loose with the methods. They don't really, in research grant proposals, sometimes the weak point for anthropology students is that their methods are too vague, that they're not really grounded in concepts that you can find in books like this. And sometimes in my program we have to train our students to do a better job of, naming specific methods. Sometimes they'll just say, oh, I'll interview this many people from, this center that I'm going to visit, and I'm going to use snowball sampling, which is just like, you meet someone and then they help you refer you to the next person, and sometimes the reviewer will say, well, how will you choose who to interview from this center that you're going to go to? What kind of interviews are you going to do? These things are often not specified, and oftentimes you can get away with that in anthropology if you have a very clever project. The reviewers can often, give you, approve your grant even if your methods are a little bit weak. And anyway, so I think this book is a good source for developing ethnographic methods, because he has particular terminology and particular methods within the methods, like how to do interviewing. What are some of the methods you can use to probe your interviewee for elaboration on certain issues, for example. And if you include that in your research, I think these specific types of methods, it'll look better for grant funders, and I think your research will also be more solid. So, for example, again, some of my students will just say, I'm going to do interviews, but this chapter I've given you the interviews chapter from this book. And he focuses on informal interviews, unstructured interviews, semi-structured interviews, and structured interviews. And I also scanned this so you can also just see the various other things in the table of contents that the book addresses. Structured and semi-structured, I feel are the main interviews that people use in ethnographic research. And they're the main interview styles that I have used. As Bernard says, with unstructured interviews, you just kind of, well, maybe we should start with informal interviews. He does give you this term, informal interviews, which is something that sort of a category that I'm not accustomed to in informal interviewing. You see he discusses it here on page 204. So I'm hearing this term from him for the first time. It seems, to me this isn't exactly an interview. He's basically saying this is a conversation, and you go write down notes on this later on. he mentions with structured interviewing, both the parties to the interview know that they're what they're doing. They're both sitting down to an interview. With a sort of informal interview, the person may not know they're being interviewed. So informal interviewing, I don't know. I just think that that's actually really maybe just observation. And that's what I find that happens during field work. You just are in a place, you're spending some time there, and you have conversations at random. You run into someone, you're on the way to a place, and you're talking to someone on the bus about what you're doing, and they give you some insight, and you write that down in your field notes, and all of this stuff can be very important. But I like to think of interviews really as just unstructured, semi-structured things that you sit down and you arrange to do with someone. So unstructured interviewing, as he tells us, is where you don't have a fixed set of questions. You have a topic, that you begin the conversation on, and the conversation goes where it will, allowing the interviewee to take the lead. And the idea is you will go into territories perhaps you did not anticipate. If you have structured questions, you may have not anticipated the right questions, and unstructured interviewing allows flexibility to flesh out those areas you might not have thought of covering. Semi-structured interviewing is when you do have questions, but the questions are not like structured interviewing. Let me jump to structured interviewing. Structured interviewing is really like your survey questionnaire, where all the questions are like multiple choice, pre-printed on a questionnaire form. You're often forced just to choose between A, B, and C. Semi-structured questions are where you come up with the questions, but there's no, you're not queuing any answers. I put up here some structured questions, semi-structured interview questions I have recently used in field work I've done on the Hearing Voices movement as an example for you. So this is questions for service users, which is what some people call patients, but they don't use that kind of vocabulary in the Hearing Voices movement. And so I have, demographic questions that will have very specific answers for my research, and I really think any research it's important to have this. I think this kind of interviewing is really best because you really want to know things like, how old they are. You want to remember the gender. Well, that may seem obvious to you, but a year later in the middle of transcribing stuff, you're behind on everything. You might not, remember these things that are obvious. And then, the real substance of the interview are these other questions. Can you tell me the problem for which you are seeking help with these various organizations? So it's meant to be an open-ended question. You're not given a bunch of choices of answer. Just tell me about your issues. And then A, B, and C are follow-ups. You might call them probing, to use Bernard's term. How did the problem begin? If the person did not, talk about the origin of the problem, they usually do. They usually tell you an origin story of how my problem began and when it's, where it went from there. What therapy did you try first? Just a few things they're meant to kind of extend the discussion of the basic problem. And then I'm asking, what has your experience been? What did you like or dislike? And these are not very many questions, but once they get going on any of these questions, they can just talk for a long time. You can end up with, more material than you'll have time to transcribe, with this many. Question number 12, are there any additional points you would like to make, or did I overlook anything in this interview? I think it's always good to add that on. What thing has been in the back of their mind that you never got to? They usually have something. to share that I didn't anticipate when I asked that final question. So that's what a semi-structured, or at least one of my semi-structured interviews looks like. Unstructured interviews, well, when I've done them, I would still get the demographic information. And then I would just say, tell me your story. Or Biju would say that. So Biju, could you say a few words about unstructured and structured interviewing from your experience with me? Like, what was that like? Do you remember? Yeah. Yeah, go. Yeah. Do you remember how they were different?
The difference between the structural and structural?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Structural is a particular, we get the services, structural.
Mm-hmm.
And structural will get a lot of information for patients.
Okay. We'll get a lot of information in the unstructured. Okay.
Structural will get a specific answers.
Right. More specific answers. Okay. Right. And so did you think that the unstructured gave
It's better for me. Structural interview is better.
Is better. Okay. Okay. Explain why. Can you say more?
So we get a lot of information from the patients.
Okay. You get more information in unstructured. And do you think that they ended?
They'll keep on talking.
They'll keep on talking. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's just not possible.
Yeah, it's ironic. The fewer questions you have, the more they talk. Right. Yeah. So you felt they were also longer interviews, the unstructured. Oh yeah. No. They could sometimes be more than an hour. Yeah. And the unstructured, the semi-structured could also be long, right? They weren't 5 minutes. They were more like 20 minutes or something like that. Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. I guess and there's always a time management issue too. If you are doing lots of interviews that take a longer time, it's going to be harder to get enough research subjects. And both of these methods have sort of different sort of methodological scientific validities. You get more comparable answers with the semi-structured because you're asking the same questions, but then you get more in-depth comments and issues you did not anticipate, with unstructured.
Some questions are very difficult to understand. The patients point of view.
Oh, some of the questions were difficult to understand? Okay, that's a good point, actually, yeah. So the unstructured interviews were better. But when we did unstructured interviews, because you're the one speaking Malayalam, I would sometimes say little things. But you would, you were thinking of, you would think of the next question. It would still be a conversation, right? Even if it's unstructured, right? Yeah, you have to decide spontaneously, right? What is the next thing you're going to ask? You let them talk, right, exactly. Or sometimes maybe you don't respond with a question. You respond by just giving some affirmation, like saying, "Oh, that must be very difficult." Yeah, as instead of another question. So, yeah, and that's actually a good point, that the questions may be hard to understand. I guess I was less aware of that. I mean, when you ask about their problem, like when you ask the person, why are you here? What is your problem that led you to? They understand that, right? They're able to tell the story, but there might be other questions that are obvious to you, the interviewer, that are maybe hard to explain, that don't seem in your own mind why they should be hard,
So when you said about affirmations, I got reminded of my favorite He
Yeah,
kept
yes.
talking, and got a lot of information through that.
Okay, exactly, and I would say also Malayalam is a language where you have to give verbal feedback, affirmations all the time, right? You have to go, oh, when people are, and if you're on the phone, right? You have to, if you're silent, just listening, they'll think the line has been cut, right? So you have to, and in the U.S. you're not expected to give this feedback. I mean, or just more occasionally. You might just occasionally go, oh, right, yes, just to let them know you haven't completely wandered off. But I think,
I have a funny question.
yeah.
See, Malayalam is artificial language.
Artificial language? Why? Why do you say it's artificial?
True Malayalam is artificial language.
Right, okay. Well, it's a challenge. I remember once Biju also told me, I find it challenging to speak in Malayalam. Sometimes I would understand the conversation. I would be able to insert a comment to the interviewee, a simple comment, But I remember saying, and you once told me even you have difficulty speaking Malayalam because it's a very challenging language. I thought that's an interesting comment. The Malayalis can have difficulty speaking Malayalam.
Malayalam is an artificial language, second-place language.
When he says artificial, what do you mean exactly?
It's constructed. It's purposeful. This language purposeful to communicate.
Any language is converted to a natural.
Right.
Slangs. So do you have slangs in Malayalam?
Oh, you mean the slangs, district wise?
In Trivandrum, each district has their own style of speaking Malayalam. So there is no style of Malayalam.
That's
Right.
for all the languages.
But that's true, yeah. But are you saying you think?
My understanding is that Malayalam is it's based on Tamil. See, the floor is Tamil and the roof is Sanskrit.
Oh, okay.
Between they have a lot of language. It's mean today morning I have a Puttu. Puttu is a Portuguese.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. Puta. Oh, really?
Casella, Portuguese. Janela,
We have many
Portuguese,
Portuguese words and
French. There's a lot of language in the structure.
Well, I mean, we're saying that, of course, all languages are constructed, but maybe you're saying Malayalam is more consciously constructed? Yeah. I mean, that's possible if we consider, greater use of Sanskrit terms in Malayalam compared to Tamil. I mean, there may have been a more conscious effort to Sanskritize, Yeah, you're right. Well, anyway, we'll move back to research methods, but there are linguists who study exactly these things,
When we interview stakeholders, should we always stick on to the semi-structured interview, or can we keep it as just the key points and go for an unstructured interview? Suppose I'm given an interview stakeholders.
Oh, if you mean a combination of the two? You mean some key points? You have key points from the semi-structured, but then.
I want to get more knowledge.
Okay.
So how is the program working? So in that case, can we go for unstructured?
Or sure, I think whatever, you just have to make a decision and have some rationale for why, you're exactly, yeah. I mean, that's how I develop my method. Just, I said that I'll have these questions so that I get at issues that I want to find, but I said I would do mostly interviews like this, but then I would do a few unstructured because it'll make me aware of things that maybe I'm not seeing by having, and I just came up with that as my rationale, like in developing my research methods, which you usually develop for, well, your committee, will review your proposal, but more important, grant funders is the main audience. And then IRB, of course, but yeah, as long as you can justify it. And I think that this book, the Russell Bernard book, is good to use for justification. So this is a bit of advice in writing grant proposals to make more robust methods. Cite sources about methods. Cite this book. Say, I'm going to use, give a name of some method, and cite the book and the page, where it's discussed, because most people won't do that. They'll have very sloppy, and it's not just these textbooks like, Bernard's textbook on methods. It's, there's also journal articles on methods. There's journals that focus on methods. So search some of those as well. Look at some studies where people, and it doesn't even have to be an article about methods. It could just be an article, that you have found very relevant for your work. What methods do they use? You can cite their methods as a rationale for using yours. So I think that's a good practice to just a very simple thing that really can add a lot to research proposal. Mm-hmm.
Sir, as the just like ma'am was saying, if you take semi-structured interview and then choose the stems of the question and let the respondent go on elaborating, then perhaps you can generate more number of probes and enrich your own tool.
Yeah.
Your semi-structured interview becomes better in the next version.
And that's what we did sometimes. Like in the semi-structured interviews, we would let the person go on, or we would let them expand on some of these questions. You can kind of make this into an unstructured interview. If like you feel like you're not getting enough information from these questions, and you ask them all, you can insert some probe. Keep on going is an option. But again, the practicalities of time management, and how many research subjects you're going to get are also there. So I found it best to have a distinction between structured and unstructured. I know that the semi-structured would be kind of the same. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking from the interviewers, we've spoken about the structure of the questions and everything.
Okay.
I was also wondering how the reception would change with the identity of the interviewer, right? For example, if we assume them to be from a particular caste,
Yeah.
or based on their skin color, or it could even be how, with my friend, she had very different answers or degrees of reception. When she was a younger interviewer who was unmarried, and later she was in her late 30s and she was unmarried, so they were more bothered about that. So they had questions to ask her, like, why are you unmarried, so don't you want kids? So there was this way of, where the whole conversation was moving away from the center, or even when people don't want to really respond because they're more bothered about the other identity markers of the interview. So then how do you bridge that?
Well, I think you can never completely bridge that, but that's an issue. That's an important issue, and that's something Bernard also, discusses in that article. That what does he have? He has some term for getting the effects, the response effects, expectancy effects. That there are certain, and there's a name for the kind of effect of the interviewee's perception of you. Yeah, that's going to color how they're, so these are things to be aware of. Are they answering questions because they want to please you, or are they skeptical of you, and they want? Remember, he also discusses what the answer "I don't know" means. It can mean many things. It can mean like I know, but I don't want to tell you. It can mean I honestly don't know, and there's many other possibilities. So that's always there. And we're never going to be able to, limit that. That's just something, that's partly why we write in the first person, because we want to be honest, who we are, that we are a particular person with a particular background in a particular place, not some omniscient, scientific prose narrator who knows all, and the reader can, just take that into account when they're trying to understand your caste or racial background and how it might have affected the answers that you got.
I'm trying to see how to like the opening question of an unstructured interview. So when we say that unstructured interview doesn't have an interview schedule or it doesn't follow any guide like structured interviews, but there will be an opening question, right?
Yeah.
Something that you open with, like. So if you're opening with how you feel about that is the right kind of question to ask in an unstructured interview, isn't that also like, are we not kind of not leading them, but giving them a guide to go in that particular direction? Like the opening question will lead them to answer in a particular way or
Yeah.
focus on something, right? So what is it, I mean, if you could give an example of an unstructured interview opening question, or if that is,
Okay.
I'm right, I'm just trying to.
No, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, literally for me, the unstructured interview opening question will be that, because I still get the demographic information. But then the more substantive question, yeah. Do you remember, Biju? Do you remember what opening question would you use in an unstructured interview?
Name and place.
You know, after that, yeah. I think you.
What will bother you most?
Okay. Oh yeah. What's bothering you most, or there was a structured interview question that was like the first non-demographic question that was something like, "What is the problem for which you are seeking?" Yeah. Did we start with the same question for unstructured interviews too? Yeah, for unstructured. For unstructured interviews. Yeah. Did we ask the same first question? Like, what is the problem that is bothering you? You don't remember? Okay. I think I believe that we started with the same question with unstructured interviews. I mean, which is just.
1 second per second as a question.
Oh, that's right. It's in my book. I also have it somewhere on this flash drive too. The actual questions. Yeah.
Just, I don't know, thanks, but what I usually do is I ask about their most recent meal to establish the rapport. Did you have breakfast? What did you have for breakfast?
Yeah.
If they say yes, what did you have? If they say no, don't you usually have breakfast? And that rapport building questions usually lead me on to the next one.
No, I got that. So kind of goes with the demographic. After demographic, you can do the rapport building. But my thing is, we have a research question in our head, right?
Yeah.
So how do we get them to talk about it without having that interview, like that opening
I
question?
pick up some words from their routine or their activity which I can logically connect to mine.
Yeah.
And then create a question on the go.
Right. This small talk, that may give you an avenue into it. But I think it's okay to have an opening question. I just think, because the researcher knows, you're still sitting down for an interview that you have both agreed to participate in. So, they're expecting, some prompt, so I think.
Institutional review boards, though, they expect a set of questions. So you need to have some right.
I believe that introductions before the question can be very powerful, and they can explain to the respondent what is the general area in which you are asking question. That I am a researcher and I am not a doctor. Even
Yes.
if I am a doctor, I am not in that role now, so I cannot treat you. So, but we will generally be talking about, say, emotional health around deliveries, husbands who were allowed to enter and who were not allowed to be present. Is there any difference? And we are going to study that. And now you speak about your experience of what did you have. This is a very powerful opening actually, food and mother, and who even they were with mentally challenged people. So they are very.
And yeah, that's and some of the things that you mentioned may be required by the IRB. My IRB approval for, I think, both big projects I did in Kerala required to say who I was, who you are, and that I'm a researcher, not a doctor. But usually they didn't understand that. Sometimes I was still a doctor in their minds, no matter what. and that, and that we want to ask them questions about their experience, and there's a certain, so that can actually the required IRB statement can act as a preamble. And I don't know about IRB approvals in India. I had to get my approval from the US. Well, actually, the second project I did, I also got my approval from my university in the US, and then I had to get approval from the IRB of the medical college hospital as well, which is a lot of hassle, but it was actually really good because I had to go through all this discussion of methods. But one thing, normally in the US, they require you to give written consent, where the interviewee will sign a form. And I have always been able to explain to my IRB that would be culturally inappropriate to do. And they always buy that argument, and which I think it is. I think that especially given the sort of power inequality and people, the people we interviewed at the mental hospital were kind of very working class people, who may have been literate, but they would not feel comfortable signing something that the foreign researcher gives them because they think, well, what's going to happen to me because I'm signing this? It's intimidating. So the IRB was easily convinced that it's okay, just give oral consent. You just tell them your research project. You give them a copy of the oral script, which you can do in Kerala because of high literacy. You can't do that everywhere you do research. But some of you are doing research projects now. What about IRB requirements in India? Are they is oral consent a standard thing, or is written consent required in some cases?
At least for my institute, we have this Institutional Ethics Committee, IEC,
Yeah.
where they ask you what kind of consent are you going to get.
Yeah.
So it could be like you have the option to take oral or written.
Okay.
But if you are choosing the oral option, you are required to provide a rationale for why not written.
Right. Okay.
And since most of the IEC committee members are from a science or technology background, like for our department, for our institute, it's mostly like BSB, the biological sciences and biomedical engineering people who are there.
Right.
So they require you to have that written consent. They kind of have that.
Yeah.
So what my supervisor advised me to do was like tell the participants like we are choosing written consent, but instead of getting the written consent before you begin the interview, have the interview, and after that, like after that, tell them that this is something that is required. Would you be comfortable?
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Because it would be very much like the rapport that you might have built throughout would be broken if you ask them to sign the form before starting the interview.
Right. Yeah.
So this was one advice that I.
Right. So doing it afterwards, they're aware of what the material is that they're signing, onto.
Be comfortable
I see.
with signing.
Okay.
Like you get the oral consent before the interview, and after that, make the written consent.
Okay. Do other people have similar experiences or different experiences from?
In our ethical committee, it is mandatory that you have the participant information. So when we give the participant information sheet, they will read through it, and then would you like to take part, or if they reject, okay, then you will not go ahead. So that part is very important.
Yeah.
Oral consent is allowed by agency actually.
And
During COVID time also I found it very difficult because we cannot access the patient.
oh yeah.
So they said even then you have to go for the written consent. Like in Google form nowadays, everyone tries to collect the data. So that also it's not actually accepted. You have to have a written consent.
So these are cases of written consent.
Yeah. So we have to have the full the Malayalam version of it, participant information sheet in the local language and the consent, get it and then only proceed.
Okay.
That's a big ethical issue because somehow are you going to mentally, the person might be, say, impressed after the interview, you do not know it.
Yeah.
If you are asking proper questions, what all are you working with meetings? So at least there are vulnerable group, like I am planning to send out request mothers. So that is ethical, that you have to protect that participant.
Yeah.
So that is very big.
Mm-hmm.
The ICMR 2017 guidelines categorizes the risk to the participant at 4 levels. And
Yep.
depending on the level of risk, the requirement varies. So it is like a clinical trial, you need a audio and video recorded consent. It's a drug trial or something. Whereas if it is like ethnographic observation, you may not need consent because the level of risk is less than minimal risk. So there is a range. And the 2020 guidelines talks about electronic forms of consent, which were brought out in the context of COVID. So the requirement for the written informed consent is considered the gold standard, but that was not possible in the COVID scenario. So they came out with alternatives when you could not go to that. So I think the 2017 guidelines and the 2020 guidelines read together would be kind of where we are as a country in terms of research. So the risk, the level of risk involved, and of course the benefit risk assessment and the power. So if you are interviewing government officials, they are powerful enough to pick you out and close the door, and they don't like to put a signature. So IRPs generally weigh that requirement because the participant is often more powerful than the researcher.
Yeah, I find that in both cases, if the participant is less powerful, it's intimidating for them to sign. If they're more powerful, they also will be reluctant to sign. There's actually no good. I mean, my belief is that the signed consent really is just for protecting the institution. It's not out of concern for the subjects. So I feel like there's a
rationally, like so whatever do it becomes very difficult. But if we argue for witnessed verbal consent, that works. Argue your case related to votes.
Exactly. And if you can argue that it intimidates your subject to sign, usually they'll buy that. And I think it's a good argument to use. Are some of you using oral consent in research?
Sir, in my case, what happened is it depends from the participant to participant. As in my case, there were some participants who belonged from the lower economic
Okay.
So in those cases, what happened is they were also not well educated. So initially, one mistake what I did when I initially went for my field, I directly went up to them and then gave them the informed consent form and then tried to explain them nicely. These are my topics, and then because that's what exactly we are taught we are supposed to do.
Yeah.
But then in field, when I actually did that with them, they were very much taken aback. As in and then when I showed them in the end, I was too vocal about my thing. I said in the end, I'll just take your signature like that. So they became a little bit hesitant and also agitated. What exactly will I sign into right like that? So this was one of my experiences that made me realize sometimes what happens is especially when we deal with certain populations like this, we can maybe ask them the consent before without showing exactly the written documents, and then tell them these are the things are there. So later on, like Donna said, then they will be comfortable to sign. But then in dealing with the participants who were educated and I could make them understand, they wanted to know beforehand what exactly I was doing. So this particular thing differed when I dealt with participants who belong from different backgrounds. Their own education and socio-economic status also played a role in handing over the informed consent form. So this is my experience.
Okay, right. Okay, so you had that experience of intimidation, okay, yes, right. And yeah, I mean, for many, for the poor, signing something that an educated person gives you often results in you losing something. I mean, often that's how they know their experience, and that I urge you to ask for oral consent because I think it really does make it more comfortable for people. Yes.
consent is a process and not an event.
Okay.
So it could be approach could lie between Donna and you, that you introduce, give some idea and then try to obtain consent. That might work better. And another point that I read in this article that was about deception during the informal interview.
Oh yeah, right.
You should appear as if you are not doing anything, but may hide from them that you are studying about them.
Okay, right.
And make field notes going to the corner.
Right.
What I realized is in India, when we are in practice, we often have to do reverse kind of deception. That patients know, the relatives know that they are coming for assessment and treatment, but still the more informal you appear,
right,
and more kind of intimate conversations you are able to strike, the better and more effective you are.
So I can resonate with what you're saying because my research was entirely on the basis of oral consent. There was nothing written.
Okay.
And also that was because it was not like a sensitive population. I'm talking to the practitioners predominantly and they were very open to it. Except when you go to institutional settings like a college or where you have to like show that you're a student from so and so institute and all of that.
Right.
And also another thing that was when you say certain things like, okay, you're particularly looking at religion per se or something like that, it's better to just say that you're anthropologically looking at the everyday or something like very broad. Helps rather than pinpointing these are the specific things you're trying to extract. So
okay.
I agree myself from doing that.
Okay, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, how you define your project, is a key thing, and you want to also use terms that people will be able to relate to, in explaining what that is. And yeah, I mean, you're bringing up risk again, like Dr. Ravi said. Most of what you guys are doing is very low risk. It's not like your clinical trial, which is also human subjects, where you're injecting something into someone's body to see what happens. That's a very, very different situation. I mean, I think talking to people about their lives and their experiences is generally a low risk thing. And just to move on.
When you were doing these interviews with the mental health patients, in India usually there is no privacy in that situation.
Yeah.
And you would like to ask private questions alone with the patient and sometimes with the caregiver. Sometimes the caregiver disturbs the conversation by being present when the interview is going on.
Yeah.
How did you work it out? Because we want a small corners, not some corner where we can sit and take it. How did you work that out?
Well, we always spoke to the patient with the caregiver.
So, but the place is always busy.
Well, usually there was some private space we could find. I mean, it's never completely private. I mean, you may be in the same room, but often a separate space. But I think generally people weren't able to hear, except for the caregiver, was there. And we figured, and that's also adjusting to the culture because the caregiver speaks to the psychiatrist along with the patient. Then I figure they should both be there, when we're speaking to them as well.
Do you think that the presence of the caregiver influence the responses?
It could. I mean, though I remember I asked this question to my advisor, my PhD advisor. He says, go along with however they present themselves to you. Don't impose some artificial idea of the individual alone will have the right answer. That there's a lot of anthropological research sort of suggesting that there's more of a communal self in India. I mean, just the fact that a caregiver is in the therapy session, with you, to me is the big indication, that speaking to get some authentic self by speaking alone may sometimes be the case, but also to have this more communal perspective is also part of the real authentic way of engaging with these problems. You don't want to erase that because of some ideal you have of how you should interact. But every choice has a problem with it. Every choice has an advantage. There's no kind of pure correct one. So the Bernard article too, I mean, I'll move past it, but I think it gives you lots of good advice I mean, for example, it says practice interviewing, to practice with someone, not just a friend who knows what you're going to say and you're going to, laugh while you're doing it. I think that's really good advice. Transcribing, what would you say about transcribing interviews? Transcribing interviews.
Transcribing. Audio, you go typing word by word. Change the script. And then
Right. But what is your experience with transcribing interviews? What's it like? Huh? You did a lot, yeah. Time consuming, right? Yeah, yeah. No, that was very time consuming. Transcribing every word in Malayalam and translating, and then I would go over and try to figure out how to. and it can be very. Yeah. No, it's. And one thing he says in here is you don't need. And we got verbatim transcripts of everything, which was really I think useful. But he also says in this article, this chapter, that you don't need to get every word, down. And so currently I'm transcribing my own interviews that I did in the U.S. in the Hearing Voices movement, and I'm not writing every word. I'm writing notes on the interviews, and when I find that they're saying something that I want to have in quotes that seems like it's going to be very useful, then I quote that part. And this way I'll have not the whole verbatim, but I'll be able to go back and see from my notes, like, what if I want some more information on this, on how they found the Hearing Voices Network? And in my notes, I might have just written, she explained to me how she came in contact with the Hearing Voices Network. There's not a direct quote, but I know, because I write in my notes occasional time points, like at 13 minutes, 10 seconds, she explained how she encountered the Hearing Voices groups, and so I can go back to that and actually find a direct quote if I need one. So that's one way I recommend that may be more practical is to do it that way. He also talks about software that will transcribe for you. Of course, that makes it very quick and easy, but the problem in my opinion, with doing that is that it's not in your head as much. Like when you need to come up with the meaning and write it up, I think it's good to go through the recording. You heard the interview once live, but then if you go through the recording and are writing notes on it, the issues, the themes will be more clear in your own head than they would be if you just had a IT transcription. You're still going to have to search that for with your own brain for the meanings and the points that you need to extract from it. I also let's say a few words about the reading I gave you from Seth Holmes, Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies, because this is meant to be an example of participant observation. The Bernard chapter I gave you is about interviewing. Bernard also has a lot of discussion of participant observation, which again might be useful for writing up grants. You could use some specific points he makes about participant observation, in your grant proposal. Seth Holmes, obviously, this is very participant, right? I said participant observation doesn't always involve participation. It's mostly observation. Clearly, this is participation that he undergoes. What are your reactions to this?
Sir, I particularly find it fascinating because the ethnography is deeply embodied and immersive in nature.
Yep.
To a point that he's literally living with the migrants and being a part of their suffering, if I can say that. And I also find him grappling with a lot of ethical dilemmas also, because he shouldn't be writing the whole border crossing thing like something, he shouldn't be romanticizing it, but instead he has just written it in the form of being a witness to their journey. So that was very interesting for me.
Okay, good point. And I like that you pointed out the embodied part of it, right? So it's actually, it's not just, you know, it's not just the intellectual exchange, you know, it's the putting your body on the bus, you know, and going into these very sketchy spaces in the city in northern Mexico and taking your body across the desert with other people and that, and also, but you know, he, in other chapters in the book, he then actually goes to the farms in the US with the people who do successfully cross over, and he tries to pick the fruit with them. So he's using his body for that, and he finds actually that he gets all of these physical problems, he can't continue. But you know, as he explains, he has a choice. He's a researcher, a privileged person. The farm laborers, sometimes they destroy their bodies, really. That's why it's called fresh fruit, broken bodies, because they're picking strawberries and other berries just for ice cream. And they're, you know, destroying their bodies at a very young age doing this because of the amount of picking that they're expected to do in a period of time. But other observations on what you read? Yes.
So he critically signifies the importance of not just the bodies of the participants, but also of the anthropologist, because he has mentioned a lot of incidents where, like when he's using the washroom, or when he's traveling in the bus and he's sleeping in the desert. I think as an ethnographer, when you're deeply immersed in that experience, you do get a lot of visceral experiences as a researcher as well. Because what happened in my research is I was navigating a village, and I went to a place and then I interviewed. And there was this 17-year-old woman who had gotten married very early, and she was talking about how she wanted to study, but then because her parents migrated, so there was no safety for her, so she also had to get married just to ensure that she is safe, because her parents couldn't carry her with them because there was a lot of risk. And she was talking about that, and then she was telling how gendered her experiences were, because she was not because her parents didn't let her study. She was a very bright student. She actually knew English as well, but they still did not let her study. And then one thing which she said, which made me feel very uneasy in my gut, was she said, when you go out of my house, people are going to talk about you as well, because they'll say how you alone are roaming through our towns, talking to people. I felt so unsettling when she said this, that people are going to talk about me like this as well. I think that it is a very embodied experience, and I could relate to everything that he has just said, because I think my field notes also look like this a lot, because I think anyways, embodiment is such a phenomenological concept when you see through it as a methodological aspect as well. So I just wanted to.
Okay, thank you. No, those are useful insights. Sorry?
The same as the phenomenon of gaze.
Yeah.
Yes. In anthropology, gaze.
Gaze. Oh,
yeah.
G-A-Z-E. Okay. Mm-hmm.
You are being watched.
Right. Yeah. You're right. Mm-hmm. And you're very conspicuous as the researcher. I mean, he is especially. He's, you know, the white person with the Mexicans, you know, and they all, you know, the buses get stopped by the police, which is normal, and like then they're like, oh, who is this guy, you know? The suspicion that he's a spy, that he works for the U.S. Border Patrol, that he is a coyote, you know, that he himself is one of the people that leads the immigrants through the desert, you know, are natural things to suspect. You know, why otherwise would this guy be among, you know, and that's often an issue. I mean, not just if you're doing his sort of unusually risky thing, but you know, it's very common to be for people to be suspicious of your motives.
Anthropologists are really the people whom government should ask about the community.
Yeah.
The community is the best.
Well, yeah, that's exactly, yeah, in a way that, and there is that ambivalent relationship to, I mean, we like to believe that we help inform government in a useful and fair-minded way, But then the other view is that we can be the spies for the government, as well is the thing that people think. And in the past, people actually spies have used anthropology as a cover. They've actually pretended to be anthropologists, to take out to do their work. So it's not unreasonable to think that anthropologists actually might be a spy. And sometimes anthropologists are followed by police during their field work just to see if they're really doing what they claim to be doing or whether they're actually doing something else, under this guise. Yeah.
Yeah, what I found most interesting was the narrative style, where he talks about the deeply affective embodiment experience, where he finally empathizes almost entirely with the migrant. When he is in that vessel and looks at the note, the things people have scratched on the walls, he felt the urge to write it down and then pass on that information. And from that, he just suddenly goes to the political, economic analysis of this. And so that kind of bridging these two to tell a coherent story is very, I think, particularly impressive. That's what I like.
Yes.
The other thing was, maybe after reading quite a lot over the past 2 decades, towards the end, he does say that when he leaves the police station, he files a complaint that he was not given access to a lawyer. So that agency, somehow it's the structures which he is pointing at are probably the same structures that rendered him with the agency to file this complaint. So that's where I got a bit so he knows his rights, and that's why he says that I was denied access to a lawyer. But why does he have that right, whereas his friend has to hide his visitors to show that he is stuck? So it's probably the same structure which is causing a lot of problems. So that's one topic.
That's true. He's in a way sort of moving between two structures. The one, and he's doing this counting on the fact that if he gets caught, that he will be able to use his rights as a U.S. citizen, to ultimately get out of too much trouble. Although, he does say he could be charged with illegally helping bring people into the country, which could be a serious charge. So even within his rights, they could have selected. The political situation at the time was such that they probably, now they probably would at this particular moment, but back when he's able to resort to that privilege, to that very different set of structure, sort of as his escape. And then I think it's an interesting moment where he gets out of jail eventually, and he's in the U.S. and but then the people with him have been sent back to Mexico, and they go back again and they do it again. He only has to do this once for his research. This particular group of immigrants, they do it twice. Not all of them get through the second, but eventually some of them do. And then he meets them. It's an excellent book. I recommend the whole thing because in the next chapter he meets the immigrants that were arrested with him, the ones that did it again and were successful to pick berries in Washington State in northwestern U.S. And then he tells you about the farm too. The farm is fascinating. There's a hierarchy of the farm, who's on top, who are the owners, who are the managers, the ethnic and cultural differences. The very bottom of the hierarchy are these people he was with. They're the pickers. And they don't even speak Spanish. Spanish is the official language of Mexico, but there are so many indigenous languages, and these are indigenous people, Triqui speaking people who do and above them are Spanish speaking Latino Americans, Mexican American managers that, push them, to work really hard. And he interviews all parties. He even talks to the owners, the high management, which is owners are a Japanese American family, the Tanaka Farms, and he discusses how The whole system is based on, well, free market economics, competition with China over the price of fruit, and how the farm actually depends on the below minimum wage, off the book labor of the indigenous people who are also so vilified in the public as illegal migrants. You know, that shows you how the economy is really dependent on these illegal migrants doing the farm work. I mean, basically, the farmers tell you if they hired U.S. citizens to pick the fruit, they would collapse. China would outsell them. They would go out of business quickly. Mm-hmm.
That's one part again which kind of spoke to me as well, because we do some research on migrants, and so in Kerala, the production, the industrial production, the real estate or whatever, is dependent on human resources produced elsewhere.
Yeah.
So the cost of growing up is somewhere else.
Yes.
But we
Right.
get them as cheap labor for the capital of production.
Okay.
So in that way, kind of
Similar issues, yeah, you're right. He does. You're pointing to his reference to the external social reproduction, right? Yeah, that you get these, and that's a traditional Marxist view, Marxist feminist view, to look at. You know, you just think a laborer is somebody who comes ready to work, but for somebody to be a laborer, they need to be free and available for like 8 hours, whatever, a day, and that is usually, you know, traditionally it's male workers, and their freedom to work is based on a woman at home doing the cooking and doing all the other things you need to live. So that's called social reproduction. You need to be able to make people available, and so a lot of that social reproduction, has been sort of done in Mexico, and delivering people in the U.S. as sort of healthy, exploitable workers is what is going on there.